So, in this episode of Teka Teki Kriminology of mine, I want to focus my analysis on, people brutality towards police instead of police brutality on our people in Indonesia. And this presentation is inspired by a series of, protests in Indonesia, not only in Jakarta but also few other cities across the country. These protests, many are calling, the most barbaric and violent since the 1998 political reformations in Indonesia. And yeah, last month I've just published my article, and from this presentation and this, episode, I aim to contextualize my research with current Indonesia's pressing issue on people brutality towards police and seeking feedback from you as my audience to improve my future articles on this context. Okay, so as everyone knows that students, workers, and citizens at that moment, was flooding the streets, and they were not only angry about single policies, but about what they perceive as a broader crisis of trust in the state. So this time, I want to examine this crisis through two theoretical lenses. First is the conflict theory, which examines and explains why citizens are defying authority. And second of all is responsive regulation, which helps us see why the state's response has made things worse rather than better at that moment. Let's start with conflict theory. Conflict theory tells us that law and order are rarely neutral. It reflects elites' interests. For groups who feel excluded, compliance does not feel like justice. It feels like subordinations. And in Indonesia, this perception is widespread. Corruption scandals involving police and politicians create an image of impunity at the top, while heavy handed crackdowns target students and vulnerable groups. And in here, citizens see laws that protect elites but punish the ordinary, people like us. In this context, we can connect to the study of Murphy's in 2017, who shows us that procedural justice is critical for voluntary compliance and sustaining compliance. And people are far more likely to comply when they see decision making as fair, respectful, and impartial. But when fairness is absent, compliance loses its moral justifications. From this perspective, protest is rational resistance to systemic inequality and the erosions of procedural fairness. Citizens are essentially saying if the law only serves the powerful who has and holds the power, then why should we comply in the end? In here, conflict theory reframes protest not as the breakdown of order, but, I argue, as a demand for justice and accountability. Now let's turn to responsive regulations developed by Iris and Valerie Braithwaite in 1992. This framework imagines, compliance as a pyramid. At the base of it is persuasion and dialogue, where authorities earn cooperation through trust building process that is, putting a lot of investment in the process of that objective. Sanctions escalate only gradually, and coercion is reserved for when cooperation fails. Most people, this theory argues, are willing to comply voluntarily if treated with fairness. Only a few require force. However, in Indonesia, during that moment, the pyramid is, upside down. Police often begin with force like tear gas, mass arrests, and skipping dialogue. When that happens, the pyramid collapses, and instead of cooperations, coercion deepens defiance. Citizens no longer see police as fair regulators or protectors of the community, but as an enforcer of elite power. I argue that without trust at the base, compliance cannot stand at all. This is if we put these two perspectives together, you can see. Like conflict theory explains why people defy, because they perceive the system as, you know, as unequal and biased, while responsive regulation explains why state responses fail, because coercion without trust only escalates conflict. And when we bring Murphy's insight back in this, discussion, the connection deepens. Procedural justice principles like fairness, transparency, and equal treatment is the missing ingredient in both frameworks. Its absence explains both the erosion of compliance and the failure of authority to restore it. The combined lesson is quite straightforward. Sustainable compliance cannot be forced. It must be built on fairness, dialogue, and legitimacy. So, what does this mean for Indonesia going forward? From a conflict theory perspective, institutions need to address inequality directly by ensuring laws are applied equally, and that elites are not shielded from justice. Without this, I assume and I believe 100%, compliance will always look like dominations. From a responsive regulation perspective, the police and state must rebuild the base of the pyramid that is containing procedural justice, procedural fairness, community dialogue, saying apology, and some exercise of restorative practices. And here again, the uh, argument of Murphy's in her work in 2017 on procedural justice is still relevant. Voluntary compliance arises when people believe that they are treated fairly, even when outcomes actually unfavorable. And that principle must guide reforms and policing and governance in Indonesia, in my humble opinion. Coercion, of course, still has a place. It's still, uh, have a role in developing the practice and the reform within the institution. But the note that I really want to emphasize here, it must be used together, transparently, and only after trust-based approach fail. Not just approaches failed. So that's could be the last resort of police uh, presence within the community. Otherwise, every failure only deepens the cycle of defiance from our community in the future. So, to conclude, the current Indonesian protests remind us that compliance is deeply political. It reflects power, inequality, and the choices that authorities make in governing. Conflict theory shows us why citizens resist, because they experience injustice and unequal treatment. On the other hand, responsive regulation shows us why state strategies fail, because coercion replaces persuasions and fairness is sidelined. I suggest that building compliance must not be through repressions, but fairness, dialogue, and legitimacy. If compliance is to be restored in Indonesia, within a context where Indonesian citizens have this kind of experience of injustice in their memories, it must rest on justice, really, not with fear. So that's the whole point that I want to convey, and I hope this episode helps you to make sense about what is or what was happened in Indonesia. Thank you. Leave your comment down below. Stay learning.